A warm welcome back to the Forensic Detailing channel. Do not forget to hit subscribe. Today's video is why do paste waxes suck? That will probably be something along the lines of a title, but more appropriately, perhaps the title should be why are paste waxes less prevalent today than they were 15, 20 or even 10 years ago. And why is that? Why are they sort of less popular? To start off, we have to understand what a paste wax is. So there is no official detailing dictionary definition that's universally agreed. But first of all, a paste wax for me is a car protection product or a car gloss enhancing product potentially that is backboned by forms of typically organic wax that are blended with softer components and perhaps lubricating oils and quite a lot of solvent traditionally to create a softer dissolved form of wax that you spread over your car, and then it goes on to cure and you buff it to a shine, and the solvent kind of vaporizes out of this formula so that the wax will toughen and form a durable layer of protection over your car. And primarily they are really a means to protect your car. If you have that coating of wax over it, then all of the things out there that can bond to your paintwork and give you that horrible rough, dry, lack of gloss finish, contamination, well, the wax kind of protects them and they can't get through to anchor into the paintwork so much. So if you keep your car waxed, you know, it tends to maintain the condition of it. So that's what a paste wax is. Let's go on to the reasons why they're less popular. The number one reason is to apply a paste wax today is quite labour intensive. You need to wash the car off first, dry the car, ideally remove contamination from the surface, because if you put a paste wax on top of contamination, you're defeating the object of using it, which is to keep the contamination off your paint. So the washing, the drying, the decontamination, the making sure the paint works right. You then have to spread this thicker resinous kind of dissolved wax over every panel, and it's a slower process to spread a dissolved wax than it is to spread a water-based product or a spray and rinse kind of type product. After the product is spread over each panel, you have to typically allow 10 minutes or whatever the wax says for the solvent to vaporize so that wax starts to stiffen. If it's backbone with wax, it typically doesn't form any sort of bond to the surface. It's just a hardening of a film. But you wait for that cure and hardening of the film, and you buff off the excess, and the fine layer that's left on the paintwork leaves a shiny, protected film. So the time to spread the product over the panel, the time for the product to cure on the panel are massive factors. It could take like half an hour to spread it over a car, maybe less. It could take up to half an hour to let it cure out. And it could take half an hour to go and buff the panel. And in relation to point one, the buff of these products can sometimes be a little bit more difficult than other forms of protection, modern forms of protection, requiring a buff to get the majority of the wax off, and sometimes even a secondary buff with a completely clean towel to make sure you haven't got any very faint films or opaqueness or high spots of wax, thicker areas of wax, and you've got that clean, perfect finish on that one panel, and move on and do the same. So slower to spread, longer to cure, potentially harder to buff because of that resinous nature as well. Some waxes that are fortified with synthetic components that make the wax, cured wax layer tougher, can be harder to buff, and the harder they are to buff, typically the more attentive you've got to be to the application. So that's the main reason, a relatively long application time. Right, let's go on to reason number two. These are essentially protective products that are there to maintain the finish of your car primarily. And the number 2 reason why waxes are less desirable is because they're mixed with often with oils and non-volatile lubricants, if you like. The wax layer that's formed on your car can attract fine dust and dirt. It doesn't attract it in the sense of pulling it in, but any dust and dirt that lands on that wax layer can kind of stick to it a little bit, rather than like you could take a detail spray that's got anti-static properties and leaves a completely dry film. The dust might fall off of that more, but on a wax layer with oils in it, potentially it can stick to it a little bit more, and it won't just sort of blow off when you drive the car and requires washing off. In addition to this, that layer of wax is also prone to humidity and moisture, especially in a hot, humid garage or on hot, humid days. The moisture just sticking and settling on parts of the car, in particular the horizontal panels, the bonnet and the roof and the horizontal panels. So what you can get is this fine misting occurring over the car, and if you take a clean microfiber cloth, it just buffs off. So often it's moisture settling on the surface. Sometimes it can be referred to as blooming or late curing, but for me it's more moisture settling. You can go on after you've buffed a wax and spot bits which continue to cure that are higher and they're too thick, and then they show as like little imperfections and patchiness as well. So that's linked in to this second bit. So the protective qualities, the dust attraction, the moisture settling on it, stuff like that is a second reason that perhaps some people might have moved away from waxes. Reason number 3 is waxes typically, especially if they're an organic wax with organic waxes mixed with organic oils, have less detergent resistance than other film forming modern forms of protection, especially like ceramic coatings, but even some water-based sealants and some synthetic paste-like sealances can have increased resistance to being emulsified, because in the composition there isn't oil or things which can be emulsified. So waxes can be removed by detergents potentially more easily than synthetic materials. Same with to a certain extent, if you're using a panel wipe as well or a hydrocarbon, that wax can be degraded more by those potentially than other materials, especially like ceramic coatings, which are more resistant to things like that. Okay, so they're more degraded by washing and stuff like that. Generally, there's exceptions to every rule that I speak about here. The fourth reason why you might not want to use paste waxes in 2025 is paste waxes are less sun friendly. Okay, in hot climates, if a car's outside and it's been prepared but it's in the sun, so let's say the worst case scenario, it's 35 to 40 degrees out there and the sun's beating down, the car panel temperatures can get roasting hot, really hot. I mean, maybe I can't think of a figure off the top of my head, but a car panel could maybe get up to 60 degrees, something like that. Now, a blend of organic waxes in here will typically have a melting point of around 60 to 80 degrees, depending on which waxes are in the composition. They all vary slightly. 75 degrees to 80 degrees, I think, is the point that carnauba wax melts. But other waxes lower, beeswax, I think, is lower, stuff like that. The point is, when the temperature of a paste wax on a panel gets very hot, the wax with heat effectively melts. It gets closer to its melting point, and when it starts to melt, it starts to soften and it becomes easier to remove. And because it's softer and it's not hardening up so much under temperature, they can also be very greasy to apply in high temperatures. So waxes aren't high temperature friendly forms of car protection. They're not the only ones that suffer from that, but it does affect them. They can be not great to work with in the sunshine. The fifth reason, which is perhaps more subtle, is when you have applied a wax to a car, you can get a nice polished feel, especially if you've prepped the paintwork properly. Your paint can still feel good after applying a wax, but typically a paste wax applied to a panel doesn't have a silky smooth finish compared to some other synthetic sealants that are engineered to be easier to buff and have very low slip surface characteristics. They're engineered in those characteristics as part of the material. The wax doesn't necessarily have that. Wax on its own isn't a low slip, slick material. Again, the exception is that modern paste waxes can have other components engineered in there with the wax blend to make them slightly slicker. But still, in my experience of these paste waxes, the finish isn't as slick as modern examples. And if I look over on my car over here, and I took a buffing cloth, let's just take one. This car is relatively clean. This rear quarter panel has a paste wax on it, and I'm just rubbing over the surface, and it feels nice, don't get me wrong, but there's a bit of grip there. And over on this panel here, I have a modern sealant that for me has a very slick finish, and I can feel the difference in slickness with the microfiber. Yeah, I can. It's just a thicker, bit more drag over here. So yeah, a modern product can have a slicker finish, coatings too as well. So they are the 5 main reasons that I think people have moved away from paste waxes, with the first reason around how long it takes to apply being the most critical reason people have moved away. Now, do not take this video as a kind of waxes suck thing, because there's lots of reasons why paste waxes are still really cool products. But that wasn't really the aim of this video. The aim was to talk about why they have decreased in popularity, and they have. There's no doubt about it. There was so much more interest in them 10 years ago, and I think those reasons I've given you are perhaps the reasons why. Why might you still want to have paste waxes, you know, in 2025 and use them? Well, for me, whenever I buy a paste wax, out of all of the detailing products you could ever buy, I get the most excited because I like looking at the composition of the wax and what this wax is all about. This is a very high-end Scholl Concepts wax that's an old school kind of high carnauba, crystalline, yellowy, very oily, smelling of cacao, you know, because of the carrier. So there's this nature and the interest in the chemistry. It's different when you get a spray wax and they all look the same, because all you see is a mist coming out, so you're not looking at the composition of it and seeing how it's unique. So I think they're much more collectible, they're much more interesting as products, and that's why I have a collection of kind of all my favourite waxes. Some of them like very high-end, very expensive, like this Zymol Concours Wax. Some of them incredibly affordable, like this £16.99 wax from Bilt Hamber, which will last as long, or if not longer, than most sealants, and, you know, beads up just as well. And that's the original Fusso coat formula for a product that's, how old is Fusso coat? I don't know. It's 20 years, is it maybe? Just at a guess. You put in the comments how old that is. When was it released? Still outperforms virtually every other form of non-ceramic protection in terms of durability, and that was done 20 years ago. So you could make a case and say, no, it's all nonsense, all this modern stuff. You've got old products that can still outlast them and all this other stuff. So there's arguments for and against with all this. You could pick a wax, and that's like a PTFE wax, the Fusso, and it is quite slick actually when you've applied it. So there's counter arguments to all the points I've made. Another reason why waxes will always, I think people will always have one and always like them, is even with everything I've said to you, once you've put that layer of wax out and you've done it properly and you cure it and you buff it, the initial shine that you get out of a wax, I think, is always quite impressive. So yeah, the shine and the luster and the jetting effect as you kind of look around the panel and you see all the light turn to colour that's coming back, turns to reflections at different angles, and the curves make the jetting effect. People say that that's warmer and it's more noticeable with paste waxes. Quite a subtle thing, but there is some truth to it. We've already talked about waxes can compete on durability with other things, apart from ceramic coatings, which will obviously outlast them. But they can be top of the pile in terms of durability if you pick the right wax. The other reason I think why paste waxes are still desirable for me is I don't always want to do everything the quickest and easy way. We have car protection products now that are mixed in with the shampoo, like ceramic shampoos or wash and shines, wash and waxes, but synthetic components in shampoos which bond to the paintwork, you know, siloxanes. You can wash the car and actually top up protection at the same time with no additional kind of calories busted. Or you have products you can just spray over the car after washing and rinse them off, and the whole car's covered in a film of protection without you having to do anything that you would normally do. You'd dry the car off just like you would if you'd washed it. But I think sometimes putting the work in and putting the time in on your car and going over and buffing it all properly and directing where you're applying it and really focusing just on putting protection on the paintwork is a nice thing, especially in summer and if you really enjoy that time in your garage with the car. So you almost separate yourself from the joy of kind of shining up your paintwork if you just use a ceramic shampoo or something like that, or a spray and rinse. You're divorcing yourself from that. So it's the satisfaction of that, and that's part of the joy of paste waxes and part of their sort of draw for me. So in summary, guys, there are definite legitimate reasons, and we've given you the main 5 ones, why paste waxes have fallen from grace a little bit in 2025 and have been replaced. And they've been replaced mainly, I think, with spray waxes or ceramic spray detailers or water-based ceramic sprays and stuff like that, because they get you there quicker and they're easy, much more rapid to apply, and other forms of protection, ceramic shampoos, spray and rinses, synthetic sealants, ceramic coatings. The whole LSP market has been flooded with different offerings that people find desirable over that. But in summary, there'll always be a place in my cabinet or my little chiller for paste waxes. And what I want to know is, how do you feel about this? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Have I missed any of the major downside with paste waxes? It's not price. Paste waxes, I think, they can be very expensive, but they can be very cheap, just like other products. But have I missed anything? And more importantly, in 2025, do you still desire paste waxes? Do you still get an urge to buy them and try them, or have you moved on? Do you collect them? Let me know in the comments. Other than that, guys, don't forget to subscribe and take care. Doug.